obviously your court becomes very well known for the big political cases, the Nkandla case, the motion of no confidence. But how effectively do you think that the court's been able to deal with this real lived reality of inequality and issues of racism, issues of, for instance, we know you did the judgment on Afrikaans in the universities, but those kind of systemic issues that ordinary South Africans are dealing with beyond the realms of the big name politics?
I think the judiciary has done well. Where the problem lies is dealing with the root cause of the symptoms that the judiciary is often called upon to address. The bottom line is this: whether it is racism you're talking about, whether it is inequality in relation to participation or meaningful participation in the economy or land ownership or any other problem, the bottom line is, what is it that we did from 1994 to ensure that the responsibilities that needs to be discharged by all of us as a matter of urgency to eliminate these critical challenges are discharged properly? What is it that we taught people, as say parents, to inculcate in the minds and hearts of their children at an earlier age to deal with racism? What am I teaching my children? What are you teaching your children? What are others teaching their children? Alive to the collective responsibility we bear, that going forward, there is a monster called racism that must be dealt with at kindergarten level, primary school, high school, all the way up. What is it that faith-based organizations have been encouraged to do to contribute towards the elimination of this problem and other tension-generating things like the land issue and the meaningful participation?
And all of those, do they give you a sense that the human rights culture, right, has been entrenched or not? In other words, the cases that are coming before us now on racism and other things, do you see them as exceptions or the rule? In other words, do you think that we are getting somewhere in terms of entrenching a human rights culture that never existed before the Constitution was born?
My sense is that we could have done much more to address racism. And you required an institution, a fully fledged institution, to confront racism. Why? Because it's a problem so serious that divided us so deeply that you cannot leave it to chance. You can't just rest on the basis that our Constitution is highly progressive, as if the Constitution is going to fulfill itself. You need structures in place to research and reflect on questions like, why is it that America has been a constitutional democracy for this long and yet racism is still alive and kicking? Why is it that many European countries have been constitutional democracies for this long and yet racism is still alive and kicking? What did they miss out on? What is it that we need to do differently at all levels of society, including the workplace? Once you have that project handled by competent people with appropriate monitoring mechanisms, then you're bound to make progress, because after 6 months, after a year, you have reason to look back and say, how are we doing in our endeavors to eliminate racism? How are we doing in our endeavor to make sure that we don't get caught up at some stage by a failure to meaningfully address the land issue or economic inequalities? So you need to be very deliberate and intentional in your endeavors to address problems that have so painfully divided us in the past.